The sweetest part was the first warning. In the end, I'll tell you the phrase I wish I had said. Dear daughter, it's nighttime. The soft light of the lamp blends with the heavy silence of the room as I write this. I'm putting this down on paper so you don't repeat the mistakes I made. I was a dreamer, full of expectations. I thought love and confusion were synonymous. And when he appeared, with his charming demeanor and eyes that seemed to understand my soul, I let everything slip away. I wanted to be seen, desired, but inside me there was an echo of insecurity, a loneliness that shrank my hopes. It was on a Friday night. He took me out to dinner. The restaurant was brightly lit, and I was nervous, trying to hide my anxiety. When he smiled and said I was different from all the others, my heart melted. It sounded like a compliment, but that phrase carried weight. It was as if he were placing me on a pedestal, but also isolating me. Then came the first rule disguised as affection. I want you to always let me know when you go out. The way he said it seemed protective, but deep down, my intuition whispered. I didn't realize it at the time. I didn't see that this need of his made me less free. That's when an alarm sounded inside me. The phone rang at midnight. He wanted to know where I was. That concern initially seemed like a show of care, but in reality, it was hidden control. The weight of expectation increased, and I grew quieter. Silence became my refuge. Guilt accompanied me like an invisible ghost as I tried to justify his demands, and I didn't realize I was losing myself, that the little rules were, in fact, red flags. Confusion grew, and my heart tightened with every message I replied to. Every, "I'm sorry," became a shackle, as if I had signed a contract without reading it. And then, the moment came when everything exploded. A discussion about the freedom I supposedly had. The feeling of being trapped became unbearable. He didn't understand why I hesitated to share every move I made. The silence between us was deafening. It sounded like love, but it meant control. If you feel the pressure in the first few weeks, pause. If affection comes with rules, pause. If your peace is at stake, use this phrase. I'm fine, but I'm not a report. If this doesn't work for you, we're on different paths. In the next episode, I'll share how the first excuse didn't heal anything. It just reset the cycle. And when I say the silence became deafening, it's not metaphorical. The feeling of being trapped in a labyrinth built by his expectations was palpable. Every time I tried to leave, he pulled me back with sweet words that now sounded like poison. It was on a gray afternoon. I remember the rain tapping against the window as he stared at me, a mix of confusion and frustration on his face. He wanted to know why I wasn't as excited anymore. What changed in you? He asked as if he were responsible for all of that. And there, in that moment, part of me decided to remain silent. It was easier not to speak. Safer. My feelings were a storm inside me, but the words got stuck in my throat. I no longer knew what was real. After all, love should feel warm, not restrictive, but his persuasive gaze made me believe I was the problem. And then, I stopped being myself. Our relationship became a guessing game. He wanted answers I didn't have. "Why don't you trust me?" was a phrase that echoed in my mind, like an endless echo. Her insecurity turned into more rules. "Don't go out with your friends without telling me. Don't wear those clothes. You can't be away from me." Each statement felt like another thread tying my body to that oppressive relationship. I didn't realize that those rules were, in fact, disguised prisons. I started to lose touch with myself. I stopped laughing with my friends. The get-togethers, once full of life, became artificial arrangements. All of this because I had ignored the first signs. I wanted to believe that if I just behaved, everything would be fine. But a part of me kept screaming to be heard. There were moments when I would wake up in the middle of the night, feeling the weight of the silence beside me. The absence of freedom was suffocating, and it was on one of those early mornings that I caught a glimpse of myself. I looked at the ceiling, absorbing the emptiness. There, far from the voices, I realized there was a world beyond that relationship. Days passed, and the pressure only increased. Even amidst forced laughter, I felt a void inside me. He didn't notice. How could he? He was so immersed in his own need for control that he couldn't see the pain he was causing. And I was becoming a shadow of what I could be. Then it happened. A conversation. Not an argument, but a desperate attempt at communication. I prepared myself, wrote a small speech on a piece of paper that I hid in my bag. I wanted to share my truths, to tell him about the loneliness I felt, about how his rules were strangling my essence. When I finally opened my mouth, the words came out as a trembling whisper. "I need space." That was all I could articulate. He looked at me with the surprise of someone who didn't expect a blow. The reaction was predictable, a defensive attack. "If you need space, maybe you're not ready for this." That sentence cut me like a knife. He turned everything around. I was the one who was wrong, the unstable one, and I didn't realize. How many more times would I need to fall to finally understand? The cycle continued. The guilt, the confusion, and the feeling of being trapped. Even after that conversation, the pattern just repeated itself. He apologized, promised to change, but it was just a parade of empty promises. I no longer knew if I believed in them or in myself. It sounded like love, but it meant an endless cycle of pain. If you feel lost in conversations, pause. If the promises don't come true, pause. If you feel like you're drifting away from who you really are, use this phrase: "I'm on a journey to find myself." If this isn't part of our path, then we need to talk. In the next episode, I'll share the raw truth about forgiveness that didn't fix anything. It only masked the pain with new risks. The truth is that, even after all of this, there was a part of me that still wanted to believe his words. It was as if hope was a flickering light on a cloudy day. I found myself reminiscing about the good moments, the laughter we shared, and the promises of a happy future. The mind has this strange way of filtering out the pain, doesn't it? You cling to what is sweet and ignore the bitter. And then came his birthday, an event that should have been a celebration, but the atmosphere was tense, thick with pressure. I had researched every detail to make sure he had the best day. He always said he liked surprises, so I organized a small party with our closest friends. But as the guests arrived, a shadow began to loom over me, that feeling of being watched. He looked at me in a way that seemed to demand a perfect performance, as if I were an actress on a stage. Deep down, I realized he was there, calculating my interactions, assessing whom I hugged and whom I smiled at. His gaze was becoming increasingly critical. When someone made a joke about how I was always by his side, I smiled, but inside, my insecurity was growing. The smile felt like a mask, and I struggled to keep anyone from seeing what was really happening inside me. That's when I realized the applause was hollow, and I didn't notice that this disguised care was shaping my identity. Every time I felt suffocated, I tried to justify the situation, telling myself that he just cared. But that justification was a prison. Love shouldn't be a battlefield where every movement is scrutinized. The party ended, and we left our friends behind. On the dark road back home, something snapped. He began to express how much he hated that I laughed so much around other people, as if my joy were a personal betrayal. Those words fell like stones on the floor of my soul. "You can't be like this," he said angrily. "You need to think about us, not yourself." And there, in the middle of the night, I knew his words weren't about love, but about control. That argument was a turning point. After that moment, his promises of change became distant echoes. I knew I needed to reflect on who I really was away from him. I started to gradually pull away, but with each step, the feeling of guilt followed me like a loyal dog. And so, the cycle repeated itself. The conversations became heavier, filled with uncomfortable silences. I tried to express myself, but the words seemed to slip away from me. "Why don't you trust me?" That old question echoed, a reminder that I was being controlled by doubt. It was on a sunny morning that I decided I needed a break. The sun was shining brightly, but I felt wrapped in a thick fog. I called a close friend, someone who had always been there, and simply broke down. I talked about my fears, about feeling breathless, and she, with her gentle voice, challenged me. "You need to see yourself, dear. What do you really want?" And there, in that moment of vulnerability, I realized something crucial. Love shouldn't make me feel so lost. Love should be a safe space. It was then that I decided that, regardless of the pain, I needed to seek that safety within myself. In the following weeks, the conversations became more difficult. I finally managed to grasp some words that I painted in my mind. An almost mantra. "It's not my fault, but it's my responsibility." That phrase became my shield. When he tried to silence me, I mentally repeated that line as a form of resistance. And so, I reached the point of deciding that I needed to leave that relationship. The hurts were laid bare, and I could no longer ignore what was evident. I wrote a letter detailing everything I felt. It wasn't an act of revenge, but a necessity for liberation. I poured out all the truths I had kept hidden for so long. I was honest, not just with myself, but with him as well. The day I delivered the letter, I felt a mix of relief and fear. He read in silence, and when he finished, he looked up. "You're making a big mistake," he said, but I was no longer listening. The fog began to dissipate. Freedom was lurking. If you find yourself in that place, know that there is a path beyond it. If you feel like you're losing yourself, raise your voice. Use this phrase, "I deserve more than this. I am seeking my true self." In the next episode, I will share how forgiveness didn't bring healing, but rather new scars to overcome. The journey continues. He looked at me, and in that moment, I realized that the expression on his face was a mix of shock and anger. It wasn't just the rejection of what I had said, but the end of a control he considered natural. The pain of freedom was beginning to surface, but insecurity still loomed like a shadow beside me. When I left that apartment for the last time, each step felt heavy like an anchor. The fresh air had a different taste, a blend of fear and hope. At the same time, the echoes of his words still danced in my mind. "You're making a huge mistake." It was as if each syllable was etched into my flesh. I recalled going to a cafe we used to visit. The walls were laden with laughter and memories, but now everything felt cloudy. The background music sounded distant, and I wondered if I could pick myself up again. The soft lighting, which used to be welcoming, now cast shadows of who I had been. I was there with myself, without distractions, without the weight of looking back. I ordered a coffee and took a deep breath, trying to absorb this new reality. The strong, bitter smell awakened something in me that I hadn't felt in a long time. The need to be myself, without the mask I used to wear. That's when she walked in. An old friend, someone who knew my fears and longings. As soon as she saw me, her eyes lit up, but soon turned concerned. I sat down at the table with her, and the words began to flow like a stream that had been dammed for too long. I spoke about the internal struggle, about how I felt like a ghost in a house that was no longer mine. Each word was a piece of me breaking free. She listened intently, and instead of trying to fix things or offer magical solutions, she simply said, "You need to find a way to love yourself again." That phrase seemed simple, but in reality it was a complex invitation. How could I love someone who had been lost for so long? And then the idea started to take shape in my mind. If I wanted to rediscover myself, I needed to explore parts of me that had long been forgotten. I began to list the things that made me smile, little joys that had turned into big yearnings. Painting, dancing, reading the books I had set aside. These activities were like beacons shining in the dark. But there was a persistent fear, like a distant echo. What if all of this was just a temporary illusion? What if I fell back into the same emotional traps? The spirit of self-deception is deceitful, and I knew I needed to do more than just dream. So, I decided to create a journal, a way to record not only the highs and lows, but also the mundane moments that made up the color of my life. Each page became a sacred space where I could be honest, expose my weaknesses, and celebrate my victories. The act of writing became a therapy, revealing truths I didn't know I needed to hear. As I wrote, I realized there was a girl inside me who still believed in magic. That small flame of hope began to ignite, and the prospect of a different future started to emerge before me like dawn. The quest for authenticity was terrifying, but also fascinating. Weeks went by. I allowed myself to try new activities, make new friends. At first, the insecurity was heavy. Strange looks seemed to follow me, but instead of retreating, I started to open up. Vulnerability had a bitter taste, but also a sweet one. It was like a new kind of freedom. It was on a sunny Saturday that I decided to go to an art exhibition. I was nervous, but the anticipation of seeing the unknown was exhilarating. As I walked through the galleries, each painting seemed to resonate with pieces of me. As I observed an abstract piece of art, I stumbled upon a truth that made me pause. Art doesn't need to be perfect. It needs to be authentic. In that moment, I realized that just like art, I too was a work in progress. The more I allowed myself to be true, the more chances I had of finding myself again. Self-love began to sprout, like a plant insisting on growing through the cracks of a sidewalk worn down by time. The journey wouldn't be easy, but the courage to try was the first step. And if I found myself lost again, I would already know where to look, within myself, in the pages of my journal, in the memories I sought to recover, and in the people I chose to surround myself with. The process of reconstruction was just beginning, and I knew the road ahead would be long and winding. Each day became a new opportunity, a new chance to rewrite my story. And this story, dear daughter, is solely mine. It is under construction, and I am the artist responsible for every stroke. In the next episode, I will talk about how scars can become symbols of strength, not weakness. The struggle continues, but now I am ready to face it.